18 Ebix Cash Studio.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Shireen Bhan and you're watching the Global Dialogue. On the show today, we throw the spotlight on bilateral ties between India and the US following the first in-person meeting between Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden at the White House just last week. Both sides have outlined an ambitious bilateral agenda, including pandemic preparedness and security in the Indo-Pacific region. In October, the two countries will co-host the Indo-Pacific Business Forum, which will bring together leaders in government and industry from across the Indo-Pacific. And while a trade deal remains elusive, trade between the two countries has grown in the first half of 2021. U.S. exports to India expanded 25%, while imports from India rose 40% annually, albeit on a negative base on account of the lockdown last year. At the upcoming Trade Policy Forum, the two countries will also seek to address existing trade concerns. The US and India, through the USISPF, have also announced the launch of a higher education initiative, as well as the Alliance for Women's Economic Empowerment. Close on the heels of these developments, the United States-India Strategic Partnership Forum is all set to begin its fourth annual leadership summit. The forum will bring together government and industry leaders in a bid to expand on the bilateral agenda between the two nations. To discuss this agenda, let's go across to my special set of guests this evening. I'm joined by John Chambers, the chairman of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, Mukesh Aghi, the president and CEO of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Also with us, Rajesh Subramaniam, the president of the FedEx Corporation, and Puneet Ranjan, global CEO of Deloitte. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the program. John Chambers, if I could kick this off with you. We've just had a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. President Biden saying that this is the launch of a new chapter in the history of bilateral ties between India and the US. Prime Minister Modi says that the US-India relationship is one which is complementary. There has been a build-up of momentum in terms of engagement between both sides. But when we talk about a new chapter, specifically from a business perspective, how do you read it? What do you believe will be the growth drivers of this new chapter?
Well, I think, Shireen, when we outlined almost 5 years ago that the relationship between the US and India could be the most strategic in the world, and it would not just be business to business, which you pointed out in the exports and the import data of 25% and 40%, but it would affect the lives of every citizen in each of the 29 states in India and the 50 states in the US, and it would be the example for all other relationships in the world. That is now coming true. From a business perspective, you begin to watch whether it's our startup engine into India or the Indian startups into the US. The activity is up dramatically. There's a common vision on what's possible. Everything from cooperation on COVID and the challenges there to how do you do trade in a way that benefits every single citizen, every single country. I think that came to life, and you saw that whether it was the Modi visit, Prime Minister visit with President Biden, the UN General Assembly session, the Quad meetings, the defense agreements, etc. So I think it is developing into the most strategic business and government and citizen relationship in the world. And I think you haven't seen anything yet in terms of what it could really be.
We haven't seen anything yet. Puneet Ranjan, let me take that conversation forward with you, because both leaders did talk about how India and the US will jointly address some of the toughest challenges that we face, and they believe that we will be able to do that together, whether it's the issue of climate change or, of course, the issue of security in this region. Puneet, as somebody who is looking at not just business interests, but how to build on other engagements between both sides, I know that many of you, in your personal capacities as well as CEOs of large global corporations, stepped up during the pandemic to really help provide assistance to India during our second wave. But on this issue of addressing large challenges and ensuring that there is transformative change, what do you believe this partnership can deliver?
Well, first off, I completely agree with what John just said. I think the India-US relationship is the most strategic relationship in the world. And I think what the two can accomplish, addressing some of the big challenges that we face, is unprecedented. And COVID-19 is a good example of that. Just to build on what John said and to address your question very specifically, Deloitte just did a foreign direct investment study. We just completed it. And there were some really interesting and surprising data that came out of that. First, India is one of the most attractive destinations for FDI. Second, despite the COVID-19 disruption, inflows hit a record high last year. And the surprising aspects were the domestic market in India was very attractive to these investors that are looking at India, equally to the potential to make in India and then export. The other interesting piece was there was a real disconnect between what is happening on the ground in India and what the perception, particularly in Japan, in the business leaders that we surveyed in Japan and Singapore, what the perception is. And that disconnect needs to be addressed to attract even greater FDI. So specifically, just building on what John said, I think business leaders are demonstrating that with the investments that they are making and intend to make.
Right. Yes, foreign direct investment has been at a record high, and the hope is that we will continue to see more of it coming in. But Mukesh, on the issue of foreign direct investment, and this is something that you have, of course, your eye on and your ears to the ground as well. One of the pain points was the retrospective tax issue. That has now been addressed, and that has brought in a large degree of relief as far as foreign investors are concerned. But from an FDI perspective, what's the expectation, especially in light of the developments that are taking place in China? The expectation is that this is going to benefit India as we see supply chains being relocated, and perhaps that could also be an area for India and the US to work more closely together.
Sure, I'd like to compliment the government of India on changing the retro tax. It sent a very positive signal to the investor community that India will not go back to the retro tax itself. I think from an FDI perspective, our estimate shows that if India is going to be a $5 trillion economy, it needs on the average $100 billion investment on an annual basis for the next 10 plus years itself. Where will that come from? Mainly from the United States. And in the boardroom discussion in the US, everybody's asking, what is your China plus strategy? How are you going to de-risk your supply chain? And India becomes a potential territory to explore. Yes, we are seeing companies going to Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, but India is becoming more and more attractive after the reduction in manufacturing taxes, after introducing PLI schemes. So we see a greater momentum taking place on investment and manufacturing moving into India.
Well, yes, we have announced several PLI schemes across 13 sectors, and you brought up the issue of corporate taxes being reduced quite significantly. So all of that come together should help bring in larger degrees of foreign direct investment. But Raj, I think the number one question that everyone will throw your way is what's happening as far as global supply chains are concerned, what's happening with freight costs, container shortages. I am going to start with that because I think everyone's interested in how this is shaping up and how long this is likely to continue before we talk specifically about India.
Well, I think it's a terrific question. Let me just first of all say that I'm delighted to be serving as part of this team of these three other gentlemen with me on the USIndia Strategic Partnership Forum. I think the work that we have done in the last few months has just been outstanding. So I feel like I'm part of a fantastic team here. In terms of the question you asked, yes, it is. The world is going through some kind of supply chain whiplash here. Especially in the ocean container side of the equation. If you look at the port of Los Angeles, the number of ships that are waiting to get unloaded today is an unprecedented high. And so there is there are a lot of snags especially in the ocean side of the equation. On the air side, as the international passenger capacity has been significantly reduced because of lack of travel. So we, from a FedEx point of view, we are trying to step in here. We've added a lot of capacity to move international air trade, especially the high-value sector of the global economy. Of course, healthcare being one primary component. In India alone, we have 40 flights a week in and out of three different ramps. We have Delhi, Mumbai, and Bengaluru as we're the only company who can do that. So we're doing our part. to add capacity to try to relieve the supply chain constraints, especially for the high-value sector of the economy. But the real snags on the supply chains are really on the ocean side primarily, and I do not see that ending anytime in the near future.
Will you be able to add more capacity anytime soon? Raj, you already spoke of the fact that you've done more on that front, but will you be able to do further?
We are, judiciously adding more capacity as the customer demand dictates. And as you just showed you in your stats earlier, that the India imports and exports are growing at a rapid pace, and especially the high value imports are growing even faster. So that that's what we're doing. So it's again, we'll have to balance it judiciously, but we have already added capacity.
Okay. John, I want to come back and talk about the areas of collaboration as well as opportunity. And I know one focus area that you watch very closely is what's happening in the startup space. USISPF is running the Startup Connect program, linking the Valley to Indian entrepreneurs back home here in India. What more can we expect on that front? We've just seen Freshworks list on the NASDAQ. The expectation is that we will see more Indian companies list there and, of course, see more listings here in India as well. What's next now as far as the Startup Connect initiative is concerned, as well as more collaboration in this space?
Well, Shireen, I think there's no better example of job creation, both within India and also in the U.S., than the startup engine, which you've been a champion of in India and represented so well. The numbers are going up almost exponentially. If you watch, I intend to have two of my startups be first unicorns and then grow beyond it. But as Mukesh will tell you, almost half our membership in USISPF is now startups. So it's the large companies and the smaller companies working uniquely together. The ramp is pretty exciting. I think the number of unicorns almost doubled this year in India, and we're seeing a similar ramp in the U.S. From my own perspective, almost half of my startups have at least one founding member in the U.S. of the India diaspora. So you see a natural alignment for the job creation engine in both categories.
It is a job creation engine on both sides, but let's address the other big factor, which is really the dragon in the room, so to speak. Puneet, let's address that issue with you. With everything that's going on in China at this point in time, with the crackdown on technology companies, with the new tech regulations being put in place, now, of course, the issue of emission and the power shortages on account of that, how do you read what's happening in China and the likely implications, not just for this region, but specifically for India?
Well, I think Mukesh mentioned supply chains. I think it's a great opportunity for India to build off the $5 trillion, about $1 trillion from the relocation of supply chains. And the relocation of supply chains for companies is not just a risk mitigating strategy, but India needs to talk about the inherent advantages that exist in India. We mentioned startups, the talent that exists, the domestic market, and so the opportunity to not only be a hub for supply chains, but to serve the domestic market is a really important aspect. So it's a great opportunity for India. There are other vexing problems that the world faces, and we're still navigating the crisis. Raj mentioned some of the work that we did collectively to address and assist when the Delta wave hit around COVID. So we've got to navigate that crisis. But climate is one where India can take a lead. Nature-based solutions are going to address the climate crisis first before technologies come online. And India is in a great position to address some of the nature-based issues that plague us all. A good example, what we're going to try and do with a couple of states is stubble burning. And when I come to visit my mother in Rohtak in November, December, it's the air quality, as you know, Shireen, is terrible. And it's a great opportunity for us to lead in India around addressing climate.
Well, that's good to hear, Puneet. How soon do you intend to get this off the ground, and which are the states that you're working with?
We're going to try and get this off the ground, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We'll do a pilot first. It's a big problem. So we'll do a 6-month pilot. And the state that I would like to start working with is Haryana, my home state.
And that is the epicenter. The northern belt is the epicenter of the problem that you speak of, and we do hope that this is up and running very soon. You'll have a lot of people who are going to thank you for that. But Mukesh, I want to address the larger issue that Puneet brought up, and that's the issue of the domestic market. And of course, that is the big opportunity that e-commerce companies and other American corporations are looking at as well. Now, from a policy perspective, from a regulation perspective, there are pain points. There is some friction as of today. What are the top issues that you would like Indian policymakers to address when it comes to some of the concerns that have been raised?
Well, I think when we look at the market opportunity India provides to U.S. companies, it's tremendous. You look at Google, look at Amazon, Uber, Facebook. They all are banned in China, but India has opened up its door to these companies itself. So I think as these companies come to India, we have to find a balance in the senses we don't, for example, from an e-commerce perspective, we don't replace the Kirana stores with just all e-commerce. There has to be a partnership between the old established way of buying groceries with a new established way of buying groceries itself. What kind of policy changes? I think it's important to understand that as we work with the government of India, there are challenges, but more important is having a dialogue which is transparent and consistent, so there's no ad hoc changes happening. So our recommendation to government of India is continue dialogue, which you're doing now with the multinationals and the policymaker to find the right viable solution for everybody.
John, a larger issue here to the point that Mukesh just raised about consistency of policy, and especially as we look at what's happening not just here in India or China, but across emerging markets, digitization could well be the growth driver. But what are the challenges or the constraints of localization of the internet, so to speak, and what should policymakers be mindful of as they tread down that path?
Well, Shireen, when you really think about what India has done so well over the last 5 years, it outlined a digital policy for the country. When Prime Minister Modi originally did that in the 11th